All right, and for more on the anniversary, we cross live to our reporter, Eldrin St. Pierre. Eldrin, it's a very good morning to you. We know that former President Thabo Mbeki, who is also the co-initiator of the organization, will deliver a keynote address. But talk to us about what is likely to happen.
Well, yes, good morning, Balisa. Yes, as you've indicated, that it will be the celebration of the 14th anniversary of the African Peer Review Mechanism, which is taking place here at Monte Casino. Quite a low-key event, not as huge as some people might have expected, considering that the African Peer Review Mechanism has been criticized for going through what some have defined as a lull, where some members were not particularly active with regards to implementing reports and recommendations that have been made by the African Peer Review Mechanism. But quite interesting this time around is that we have the co-initiator, as you've indicated, former President Thabo Mbeki, who will be part of the panel that will be discussing various issues that are currently affecting the country and, of course, the continent. So we expect a lot of issues to be raised during that panel discussion. And this comes, of course, as the African Peer Review Mechanism also celebrates the first year of its permanent CEO, Professor Maloka, as we've just indicated in that insert that we have just played, and some of the issues that he has raised. Remember that some of the criticism has, of course, been that the failure of member states, countries to implement the recommendations, and some believe that there should be sanctions, considering that the APRM is an extension of the African Union. It is an independent agency of the African Union. There should be sanctions when member states, countries fail to implement the recommendations that have been set out in these reports. And Maloka, as he said in that insert, believes that because it is a voluntary, member states do join on a voluntary basis, there is no need for sanctions, and it is based on self-assessment, and the APRM only comes in as a review mechanism after the member state countries have reviewed themselves, and recommendations are, of course, then made.
Eldrin, I would imagine that issues around xenophobic attacks in South Africa will also be on the agenda.
Well, quite certainly, Balisa, if you remember when former President Thabo Mbeki was inaugurated as the UNISA Chancellor, he spoke at length about the xenophobic violence that South Africa has been facing, although he doesn't term it as xenophobia, and that's something that's quite interesting as well and intriguing, looking at how the African countries have termed the violence that has been taking place against the foreign nationals, including South Africa's own government. President Jacob Zuma terming it as Afrophobia, nobody really calling it xenophobia. But if you remember that the African Peer Review Mechanism had a report where it detailed or it sounded the alarm that South Africa will be facing these xenophobic violence back in 2007 already, and a year later those violent attacks against foreigners happened. It started in Alexandria, and of course it spread out. They believe, or some civil organizations believe, that the failure of South Africa to implement that report in its entirety has led to the violence. And a couple of years later, in 2015, we saw that violence again spreading up against foreign nationals. And now again in 2017, we find ourselves back at the same place. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what are some of the ideas that the different member states of the African Peer Review Mechanism come up with regards to South Africa dealing with this issue of xenophobia, or whether they term it Afrophobia.
All right, Eldrin, we'll leave it at that, but thank you so much for coming through. That's our reporter, Eldrin St. Pierre, live from Monte Casino, talking to us about the 14th anniversary of the African Peer Review Mechanism. Do stay tuned to SABC News for the latest regarding those celebrations.